I never wanted the promotion. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in my new corner office on the 47th floor, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the city skyline. The position opened up after David Cooper, my predecessor, disappeared 3 weeks ago. The police found his car in the parking garage, laptop still in his messenger bag on the passenger seat, but no signs of foul play. It started with small things. A coffee cup knocked over in the break room when I was certain I'd left it upright. Files rearranged on my desktop that I knew I'd organized differently. The cleaning crew denied touching anything on the desks, company policy. I blamed it on stress and long hours at first. Taking over David's responsibilities meant learning new systems, managing a team of 20 people, and dealing with clients across multiple time zones. The security logs showed I wasn't alone in my late-night habits. Every night for the past 6 months before his disappearance, David's keycard had been used to access the building between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. The timestamps were irregular. Some nights he'd arrive at 11:15, others at 2:43. But he always left before sunrise. When I asked his team about it, they seemed surprised. As far as they knew, David had been a strict 9-to-5 person who preached work-life balance. I found the first concrete clue in the server room. I'd gone down there to retrieve some archived files from our backup storage. The room was a maze of tall black cabinets, humming with cooling fans and blinking with tiny LED lights. In the corner, behind the last row of servers, I found a desk. Not our standard-issue office furniture, but an old metal desk that looked like it belonged in a 1950s detective novel. The surface was clean except for a single manila folder. The folder contained printed emails, dozens of them, all between David and someone using an encrypted email address. The messages were cryptic, filled with references to delivery schedules and processing requirements. But what caught my attention were the attachments: spreadsheets tracking employee work hours, security camera blind spots, and maintenance schedules for the building's freight elevators. I started tracking the freight elevator usage during the night shift. The maintenance logs showed regular operations between midnight and 3 a.m., but the building manager confirmed no scheduled deliveries during those hours. The elevator would travel from our floor to the sub-basement level, where only maintenance and IT had access. Each trip lasted exactly 7 minutes. The security cameras in the parking garage had blind spots, the same ones marked in David's files. I spent 3 nights watching from my car, documenting every vehicle that entered and left. On the 3rd night, I saw it, a white, unmarked van that backed into the loading dock at 1:47 a.m. 2 figures in dark clothing unloaded what looked like large, heavy containers. They were gone within minutes. Going through David's computer files revealed more disturbing patterns. Hidden behind layers of password protection, I found a program that automatically transferred small amounts of money from thousands of corporate accounts into an offshore bank. The transactions were too small to trigger any alerts, fractions of cents that added up to millions over time. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. The program was still running, and the logs showed someone was accessing it remotely every night. I shouldn't have gone to the sub-basement alone. The service elevator opened into a corridor that looked nothing like the polished corporate floors above. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, and the concrete walls were lined with warning signs and electrical panels. The air was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and something else, something metallic and organic that made my stomach turn. At the end of the corridor, I found a heavy steel door with a keypad lock. It took me 3 tries to enter the code I'd found in David's files. Inside was a storage room filled with large metal containers, each bearing hazardous material warnings. The labels listed contents as medical waste, with dates and tracking numbers that matched the late-night deliveries. Back in my office, I pieced it together. The company's pharmaceutical division had been running unauthorized trials, disposing of the evidence through a network of shell companies. The money laundering was just a bonus. The real profit came from selling trial data to competitors. David had discovered it and tried to gather evidence, but he'd gotten careless. They must have realized he was watching. I made copies of everything and encrypted them, sending one set to my personal email and another to a lawyer friend. Then I contacted the FBI's corporate crime division. They told me to act normal while they built their case. But maintaining normalcy becomes difficult when you know you're being watched. The cameras in the office suddenly seem more obvious. Every late-night security guard could be reporting my movements. Tonight, as I write this, I can hear the freight elevator moving. It's 2:17 a.m., and I'm alone on the 47th floor. My computer shows the security camera feed. Two figures in dark clothing are stepping out of the elevator. They're not carrying containers this time. They're moving with purpose, heading toward the executive offices, toward my office. I have 3 minutes before they reach me. The stairwell is too far. They'll see me if I make a run for it. The window washers left their platform attached outside, 400 feet above the street. I'm not a religious person, but I find myself praying as I open the window. The night air rushes in, carrying the sounds of the city below. I hear footsteps in the corridor now, growing closer. The platform looks sturdy enough. I think about David, wondering if he faced the same choice. The handle on my office door begins to turn. The first red flag should have been the salary. No startup offers entry-level data analysts twice the market rate, especially not in this economy. But I was desperate after 6 months of unemployment, and Metrics Flow's offer letter arrived the same day my landlord slipped a final warning under my door. The office space took up half of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, all exposed brick and steel beams trying too hard to look hip and innovative. It started with the smartwatches. Company policy required all employees to wear them during work hours. They tracked standard health metrics, heart rate, sleep patterns, stress levels. The HR manager claimed it was part of their wellness initiative, but I noticed how the data synced automatically to our work profiles every hour. My coworkers didn't seem to mind. They were too excited about the catered lunches and unlimited vacation days. The overtime wasn't optional, though they never said it directly. People who left at 5 p.m. didn't last long. There was always another deadline, another critical project that needed all hands on deck. I started noticing patterns in the terminations. They always happened when someone's stress levels had been consistently low for several weeks, according to the watches. Even the office plants were monitored. Each desk had a small potted succulent with a sensor measuring soil moisture, light exposure, and growth rate. The plants that showed unusual growing patterns were quickly replaced. I once asked our office manager what happened to them. She smiled and said they were recycled into our sustainable waste program. I couldn't help but notice how the new plants looked identical to the old ones, down to the smallest imperfection. The data center in the basement consumed most of the building's power. The electric bill must have been astronomical, but nobody talked about it. All that processing power for a company that supposedly analyzed social media trends seemed excessive. The servers ran hottest between 2 and 4 a.m. when most of us were asleep. Most, but not all. Some employees worked strange hours, appearing and disappearing at odd times, their faces pale and drawn. Then came the supplements. Small white pills in branded bottles, distributed monthly by the wellness team. Performance enhancers, they called them. Completely safe, FDA approved. The first few weeks, I flushed them down the toilet. But then my productivity scores started dropping, and my manager scheduled a concern meeting. I started taking the pills. The headaches were brutal at first, but my numbers improved dramatically. Late one night, I discovered what the servers were actually processing. I'd been tasked with debugging a data pipeline when I found the hidden directories. They were tracking more than just basic health metrics. The watches were monitoring minute changes in brainwave patterns, neurotransmitter levels, even genetic expression. Each employee's biological data was being fed into some kind of machine learning model. The real breakthrough came when I found the research papers. They were buried in encrypted files, authored by our CEO under a different name. The papers detailed experiments in cognitive optimization, using AI to identify and enhance specific neural patterns associated with productivity. The supplements weren't just performance enhancers. They were recoding our brains, making us more efficient processors in their human data farm. The side effects started showing up in month 4. Nosebleeds were common enough that they installed special disposal bins in the bathrooms. People complained of lost time, hours or even days where they couldn't remember what they'd done. The company psychiatrist called it productivity fugue and prescribed more supplements. Nobody quit, though. The severance agreement we'd all signed had a non-compete clause that covered 5 years and 3 continents. I tried to warn people, showing them the research papers and brain scan data. But the pills had done their work too well. My coworkers just smiled and talked about optimization metrics and productivity goals. Their eyes were glassy, reflecting the blue light from their monitors. Even after I pointed out the changes in their brain chemistry, they couldn't or wouldn't see the problem. The company was preparing for human trials of version 2.0. I found the documentation on a restricted server, neural mappings that went beyond mere efficiency. They were trying to create a hive mind, linking workers through a central AI that could directly optimize their cognitive processes. The FDA paperwork was already filed under the guise of a workplace wellness study. Security got tighter after I accessed the restricted server. Cameras tracked my movements constantly. My smartwatch reported elevated stress levels, triggering wellness check-ins with HR. They increased my supplement dosage. The headaches got worse, and I started losing chunks of time. Sometimes I'd find myself at my desk with no memory of the past few hours, lines of code on my screen that I didn't remember writing. I'm writing this from my car in the parking garage, using the laptop I smuggled out in my gym bag. The thumb drive with all the evidence is taped under the spare tire. My hands won't stop shaking. Withdrawal from the supplements, probably. The security team will notice I'm missing from my desk soon. They'll check the cameras, track my watch's GPS, but they don't know I swapped my watch with a defective one from the tech department. The FDA investigator is meeting me in 2 hours at a cafe 3 cities away. I have copies of everything: the research papers, the brain scans, the server logs, tracking our cognitive deterioration. The rain is getting heavier, drumming on the car roof. Through my rearview mirror, I can see the elevator lights moving, descending toward the parking level. My head is pounding, and there's a metallic taste in my mouth. I start the engine. I just hope I can make it out before the next memory lapse hits. The basement archives of the Department of Housing records stretch for what feels like miles. Row after row of metal shelving units, each one packed with manila folders dating back to the 1940s. When budget cuts hit the city government, I was the only archivist who didn't take early retirement. The pay was decent enough, and I liked the quiet. Just me, decades of paperwork, and the gentle hum of ancient fluorescent lights. The anomaly showed up in the property records first. I was digitizing files from 1973 when I noticed that certain addresses appeared multiple times with different owners listed for the same dates. Not unusual for a clerical error from 50 years ago, except every overlapping ownership period ended with a death certificate. Different causes: accidents, suicides, sudden illnesses, but always exactly 7 months after the duplicate deed was filed. I started keeping a log, typing out the addresses and dates on the old Remington that still worked better than our budget Windows laptops. 17 properties scattered across the city. Each one had between 2 and 5 ownership overlaps between 1973 and 1989. Every overlap ended the same way: one owner dead, the other's records simply stopping, as if they'd vanished from the system. The microfiche archives in the sub-basement held newspaper records going back decades. I spent my lunch breaks scanning through obituaries and accident reports. The pattern became clearer. Each death had seemed innocent enough alone: a car crash here, an accidental overdose there. But together, they formed a constellation of carefully constructed coincidences. Someone had been erasing people and making it look like bad luck. The building plans revealed another layer. All 17 properties were connected to the city's original steam tunnel network. The tunnels had been officially decommissioned in the 1960s, but the blueprints showed modifications made well into the 1980s. New passages that didn't appear on any public records, connecting basements that shouldn't have been linked. I found the tunnel entrance behind a storage rack in our building's sub-basement. The door's hinges were well oiled despite decades of supposed disuse. The air that whispered through the gaps carried the scent of damp stone and something else, something chemical and sharp that made my throat tight. I didn't go in that day, but I took photos with my phone and marked the location on my growing map of connected sites. The police archives were harder to access, but my city employment badge and a story about digitizing historical records got me in. Missing persons reports from the overlap periods filled a whole box. Most had been closed as resolved despite no body ever being found. The investigating officers' names were repeated across multiple cases. None of them still worked for the department. One had died in a hunting accident, 2 had moved away, and the rest had taken early retirement with full pensions. Back in my office, I created a database linking all the records: property deeds, death certificates, missing persons reports, tunnel modifications. A pattern emerged in the dates. Every activity clustered around the spring and fall equinoxes. The most recent cluster was from 1989, when the city had digitized its record-keeping system, as if whoever was behind it couldn't operate in a world of electronic footprints. But they hadn't stopped. They'd just gotten smarter. I found similar patterns in modern records, buried under layers of shell companies and digital bureaucracy. The same 7-month cycle, the same convenient accidents, but now spread across different jurisdictions and databases. The names were different, but the signatures of the notaries and witnesses matched ones from the 1970s files. Not the same people, the same handwriting passed down like a deadly inheritance. The photographs were the most disturbing evidence. Contact sheets from crime scene documentation, architectural surveys, property assessments. In the background of dozens of images taken decades apart, the same figure appeared. Always distant, always slightly out of focus, but wearing the same distinctive coat. A coat I'd seen hanging in our break room just last week, on the rack with a dozen identical ones worn by the building's maintenance staff. The maintenance department's records showed the same staff rotation for 30 years. Not the same people. The names changed, but the positions remained identical. 1 supervisor, 3-day shift workers, 2 night shift. When someone left, they were replaced within a day. No job postings, no interviews. The new hire's paperwork was always processed by the same HR clerk who'd been with the department longer than anyone could remember. I started noticing them around the city. The maintenance workers in their dark coats, emerging from steam tunnels and utility entrances, always during shift changes when the streets were busy with commuters. They moved with purpose, carrying clipboards and tool bags, wearing ID badges that caught the light at angles that made the photos unreadable. Normal enough to be invisible. The security cameras in the archive caught them 3 nights ago. 3 figures in maintenance uniforms accessing the property records from the 1980s. They spent 4 hours carefully removing files and replacing them with identical folders. The timestamps on the footage kept jumping, creating gaps just long enough to make the footage useless as evidence. But I'd already scanned the originals. I'm writing this from my home office, surrounded by 30 years of evidence. The pattern is starting again. New property records are being created with overlapping dates. The spring equinox is 2 weeks away. My phone keeps showing missed calls from the maintenance department about a routine inspection of my office. Yesterday, I found a coat like theirs hanging on my office door. A gift from HR, the note said, for my years of service. There's a car parked outside my house now. Dark sedan, government plates. I've mailed copies of everything to 3 different journalists. The originals are hidden where they'll never find them, in the one place they'd never look. The newest section of the archive, the digital records they avoid. I can hear footsteps on my front porch. Heavy boots, familiar from the echoes in the archive's corridors. They're not bothering to be quiet anymore. I suppose after doing this for 50 years, they know no one ever believes the archivist.